The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, America. Good morning, world. Good morning, CHD. Welcome once again. My name is Michael Kane. I'm the Director of Advocacy here at Children's Health Defense. We have a blockbuster show for you today. I'll be talking to Jeffery Tucker, the founder of Brownstone Institute, about the new executive order from President Donald Trump and the vaccine choice vote. Then the legendary Dr. Meryl Nass will be talking to Dr. Paul Marik about cancer and metabolic healing. This is an hour you don't want to miss a second of, so stay with us the whole time. But first, as always, we start with some news headlines. The great Senator Ron Johnson had a tweet out there. The vaccine injury cover-up continues. Yes, it does. Federal health officials used a flawed algorithm they were warned was hiding COVID injection injury safety signals. And apparently they are now using it to hide all vaccine injury safety signals. This is corruption that must be exposed, and the legacy media must start reporting it. I agree completely with Senator Johnson. His blockbuster report is showing that they know vaccines are causing harm, especially the COVID shot, and they're intentionally hiding it. We have some good news. The Army, the military services, Secretary Hegseth are continuing to move forward with reinstatement. Here's Undersecretary of War Anthony J. Tata, proud to welcome back another brave warrior who was negatively impacted by the COVID-19 vaccine mandate, Brett Bender. Congratulations to Brett Bender coming back to the Army. You know, when I interview Davis Young's former Air Force JAG attorney about these things, the Army has been leading the way with this reinstatement. But now Secretary Hegseth has a superior command at the secretary level overseeing all of the agencies, which is good. We should have some normalization. I think we have another one from Kevin Boren. Update reinstatement numbers. The U.S. Army COVID Reinstatement and Reconciliation Task Force, R2TF, has been working tirelessly, faithfully, and diligently to fulfill President Trump's executive order. I have a dream team of amazing teammates who are laboring days, nights, holidays, and weekends to ensure we serve our fellow warriors of conscience well and return them to service with honor. Speaking of warriors of conscience, on June 10th, Children's Health Defense is going to be at the Capitol having an advocacy day in the daytime. Senator Ron Johnson, Senator Rand Paul, Rob Schneider going to MC it for a little levity. Just added Surgeon General Latipo will be there in the daytime as well, too. Representative Paul Gosar will be speaking in the daytime as well, too. Possibly Representative Luna. I hope so. I know some people are trying to make that happen. Talking about vaccine issues as well as EMR and wireless harm issues. Major League Baseball player and pitcher Noah Syndergaard is going to be there talking about non-contact injury happening from, believe it or not, cell towers and stadiums to athletes. You don't want to miss this. And then in the evening time, after the Advocacy Day at 6 p.m., we're going to be showing Duty to Disobey. This is at the Congressional Visitor Center in the Capitol, 6 p.m., and there'll be a roundtable held after the showing, led by Senator Johnson, with warriors of conscience there, discussing the movie and discussing this reinstatement process. So don't miss that June 10th. You need to register. You can go to chdadvocacy.org. You have to register to have a seat. If you're not registered, you might not be able to get in. There's still seats available for the evening time. For the daytime, those are filling up. So you need to register if you wish to go to that. Trump's executive order. Let's show a shot of his order realigning United States core childhood vaccine recommendations with best practices from peer-developed countries. Defender just did a report on this. Trump signs executive order backing HHS on childhood vaccine reform. Will it matter? This is a great report you should read. The link are in the show notes. But right now, I have an expert in the field, someone I just absolutely love talking to on all of these issues. Jeffery Tucker, the president of Brownstone Institute. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
It's
How
good
are
to
you
be here.
doing?
Thank you. I'm fine. Thank you.
So Trump's executive order realigning the vaccine schedule, bringing the number of recommended shots from federal health agencies down to align with countries like Denmark and Japan. What do you think about this happening in the spring of 2026?
The executive order was released on Friday night after the close of business, which is a little bit funny. That's usually the time Washington releases things to escape the news cycle. You know, it's a kind of a strategic release. The important thing to understand about this executive order is that it's several months in formation. I mean, even back to the beginning of this year, it reflects the President Trump's personal views and priorities, and something that he had tasked Robert F. Kennedy with doing as head of HHS, and the views of experts around Bobby at HHS, and including a panel coming out of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. So, and it also reflects public opinion. So there's really nothing should be controversial about this executive order at all. It just says what the people want, people's president wants, what the president's appointees want, and what the president's appointees want. And growing numbers of scientists and experts who completely agree with this. So why is it? Why is there such resistance to this? And there's really only one clear answer, and it's the industry that's affected. They don't want the schedule dialed back. They want the status quo to remain exactly as it is, where the industry is most powerful in these sort of northeastern blue states. They've already announced that they're going to secede from the CDC, because they believe that this was coming. There's going to be a coming change to the schedule, and they want nothing to do with it. They want to continue to impose mandates on all the kids, despite the science, despite the public opinion, despite the growing consensus among people who are real experts. So we've got a real fight on our hands. But the fight pits like the people's elected representatives, the people's elected representatives' appointees, the appointees scientists, versus an increasingly isolated industry that just wants to push its products on people, whether they want them or not.
Well, it's an isolated industry, but an unbelievably powerful industry when you're talking about big pharma and just where their tentacles go deep, 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 deep into the bureaucracy and the federal health agencies. And Jeffrey, you and I and our colleagues have been watching that battle that Secretary Kennedy, Director Jay Bhattacharya are having. So it's definitely rough. I want to talk a little bit about one of the specifics from this executive order. Dr. Robert Malone analyzed this and said what is happening in this executive order is the president is taking a power that kind of evolved over the years away from ACIP, which was supposed to be an advisory committee, as it is stated in statutory law, and take that and place that power more into the CDC director, who is actually appointed by the White House, by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and in consultation and such. So to my take on this, currently, the acting director of CDC is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, someone you know well, someone who I absolutely love. This man was on the right side of things when no one was, when you and I and CHD and Bobby Kennedy were quite lonely. Dr. Bhattacharya put so much on the line. But he is the acting director, and there is a nominee in the wings who I am uncertain if the new nominee, whose name escapes me right now,
Erica
is
Schwartz.
in line. Say that again?
Erica Schwartz.
Thank you, Dr. Erica Schwartz. I am uncertain if Dr. Erica Schwartz's opinions would align with the spirit and letter of this executive order. So I'm curious your thoughts about this.
So I don't, it's impossible to predict with Dr. Schwartz. On the other hand, Bobby has confidence in her. Jay has confidence in her. She's going to be surrounded by many people. She knows who the boss is. So I think she's going to perform as a good soldier that she always has been. So she's not maybe an ideologue or a specialist in these areas from our neck of the woods, but I think she's going to be fine, and she certainly will respond to Bobby's priorities and to the president's priorities. So that's the thing, Mike, that we need to understand here. Um, that we're talking about something that's supported by overwhelming supermajorities of the public. They all want the childhood schedule cold. They don't want these mandates. They're very suspicious of big pharma. We've got a president now who has made his views perfectly clear, which views that industry finds appalling, but he very bravely went out there and said, "Look, there's too many shots, and too many of these composite shots, and we need to get to the bottom of the vaccine injury." That's what President Trump has said. So there's a consensus, a growing consensus across the board. So I don't think we have to worry about Erica Schwartz. It's true she has a history of implementing mandates in terms of the military, and that's regrettable. But on the other hand, people's minds change, and she's always, like I say, she's always been a good soldier. So I think, look, nobody's going to stop this. This executive order just makes it really plain. The other thing that's interesting to me about the executive order is it's, to your point, it's consistent with what the Trump administration has wanted since it took office, really the first term, and especially the second term, which is to take back the government for the people and the people's elected representatives, and away from industry and the deep state bureaucrats that have been in charge. So that's what this is all about. And in that sense, there's nothing unusual about this. He just wants the people to have a voice again and the forging of government policy. So that's what this is about. You'll notice too, and I think this is important, the passages in there that twice underscore the importance of informed choice and informed consent for vaccination. So in one passage, he says other nations don't mandate vaccines; they trust the people and people's decision making and power to make the decisions for themselves. The U.S. should be just like that, and it says the second time in a way that's consistent with religious liberty and parental rights. So now this is careful language, and the reason the language is careful is that these mandates mostly trace to state-level decision-making powers, and Trump has no intention of passing some sort of national law to override state law, but he wants to create an environment that lends itself towards these religious liberties and parental rights and free choice like that exists in other nations. And so the executive order, walks this line very carefully, but it says pretty much everything that any strong advocate of medical freedom would want to be said in an executive order.
So I appreciate your optimism about the nominee for CDC director. I'm going to roll with your optimism for now. Hopefully she aligns with Dr. Bhattacharya, Bobby Kennedy, President Trump, and the nature of this executive order. The AAP has said they plan to legally challenge this executive order. Can't stop, won't stop the AAP, my friends. Can't stop, won't stop them. That we know what they're doing. What I want to get into now, which I think is fascinating, and Jeffrey,
you should make it clear that the AAP is an industry lobby, right? Let's just make that clear.
They exist to make sure doctors are making money. That's just a fact. So, but what I want to move into now is something that you and also Leslie Manookian from Health Freedom Defense Fund really led a charge on once you caught the sense that the numbers we were seeing weren't completely right. What is the vaccine choice voting block? What does that look like? What is the MAHA voting block? So I'm going to show a couple of polls right now. The first one is from a group that actually backs something called RFK Jr. Watch. So they hate Bobby Kennedy. Data for Progress. In their numbers, they show, I consider myself part of the MAHA movement, all likely voters, 14%. That's in the top bar there, the orange there, all likely voters, 14%. Excuse me. So from a pollster that hates Bobby Kennedy, they asked the question, do you consider yourself part of the MAHA movement? And 14% of people said, not I kind of like MAHA. That was more like 50% if you looked at all the bars. I consider myself part of the movement, like me and you, Jeffrey, like part of the MAHA movement. Now we got another poll of the Daily Brief, which comes out from MAHA Institute, put this up. According to an article from Daily Caller, an unpublished poll conducted in October by Fabrizio found that a large majority of Americans are in favor of health freedom. 73% of the voters are concerned about childhood vaccine mandates. Now let's go into one quote from the Daily Caller article. Look at this. Most voters are concerned about a variety of general health issues, but just a third of voters call themselves a part of the MAHA movement. Now, we have our range here from a pollster that hates the MAHA movement on the low, it's 14%. From Fabrizio, a pollster that President Trump in particular trusts, it's 33% of total voters, regardless of political party. Jeffrey, a year ago, we were fighting and arguing MAHA represented 5% of the vote. Now, here's the data here.
Yeah.
Your comment, please.
Well, I will say this, that, a lot of these polls, and I've become something of an expert in polls inadvertently because I constructed one in late February to find out what was going on here. And what I learned was that so much really depends on the nature of the question. So, like, if you go up to a random person and say, "Do you consider yourself part of the MAHA movement?" I mean, the first thing that's going to happen is people go, "Well, what is that? I'm not sure. What is that? And what does it mean to be a part of a movement? Am I carrying my membership card? That I pay my dues? And the natural answer would be, well, not really. But if you change it and say, what do you think people should have the right to reject medical treatments that they don't want to make informed choice? You're going to get numbers that are closer to upper 80% and 90%. So. And people really do care about this intensely. You're pointing out something interesting that just a few years back, you felt very isolated and sort of alone. What made the difference here was, of course, the COVID experience, where this untested experimental shot was forced on millions of people, tens of millions of people, against their will, and resulted in vast health problems and documented deaths. So, of course, you've got a very intense focus on medical freedom now that maybe 10 years ago would not have expressed itself in any kind of voting bloc. But, forcing shots on people, this is a very aggressive thing to do, and it's a little bit like conscripting people into a pharmaceutical army, And if you look back at the history of the protests against conscription in this country, conscription for any cause, like if you're going to force people to do something against their will that involves their human person, you're going to provoke a massive backlash. We saw this in the 19th century. We saw it in the late 1960s with the Vietnam War conscription. So vaccine conscription is of a very similar sort of thing. It contradicts the American spirit. It flies in the face of sort of free will and fundamental tenets of the Declaration that we believe in this country. So when the COVID shot, and this happened in I guess the first quarter of 2021, when they found out the uptake of these new experimental shots was so low, they said, okay, not a problem. We're just going to force everybody to do it, right? And well, that was even from the point of view of the pharmaceutical companies, this was a huge disaster for them long term, because it gave rise to a mass movement that's newly aware of the threat that these people represent to our bodily autonomy and ultimately to our health and to our freedoms. So it was the pharmaceutical companies together with the Biden administration that created this mass movement in the first place. And this mass movement is not going anywhere. We're going to get our way one way or the other, whether it's through an executive order or court decisions or just regular elections or whatever. But we're not going anywhere. Is it 14%, 30%, or maybe it's closer to 50 or 60%, or maybe it's a lot more, depending on the way you ask the question.
You said so much that's great there. I want to talk about this MAHA movement thing. To the average person, if you say MAHA, they think vaccines. Just to the average person, that's what's been branded to them: MAHA, Bobby Kennedy, Trump vaccines. That's the first thing. That's what most people equate it to, especially the most like uninformed voters and such. So when you ask somebody, are you part of this movement? There's two people who say yes to that. One, people like me and you, Jeffrey, real true people that follow our platforms, follow CHD, follow Brownstone. There's that person. But then there's also the person who says, that sounds cool. The MAHA movement. Yeah, I'm part of the MAHA movement. And they say yes in the poll because the branding speaks to them. Now, listen, 14 to 33% as our range for MAHA movement, people who identify as that 30% is the base of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I mean, it is massive. And I think when this is becoming realized, Bobby Kennedy, President Trump, others in the administration, I don't know how this happened. I don't have any inside info on it, but I think very shortly after this, Jeffrey, we saw this executive order come out at the height of midterm election season. So to me, I think it's a signal that the Trump administration realized this is a winning voting issue, despite the past 4 months of everybody being propagandized.
You're
that this
so
was a
right,
terrible voting
Michael. And I think it's worth actually revisiting this, because this is a flipping of a narrative that happened very, very quickly. So back in February and March, everybody in the know was certain that the vaccine skepticism, was a political loser. This is a quote from one poll that came out in December. And so the issue was sort of shelved.
Yeah.
And all the talk among in polite society was that Bobby is toast. That this issue is going away. The industry is won. The crazy anti-vaxxers are not going to make any progress. This was like everybody who knew what's what knew that for sure. Well, so I think this entire thing was based on an illusion. And so you have to understand something about the way the American ruling class media elite work. If they repeat something enough times to each other, they come to believe that it's true, even if the facts aren't there. Just because all my friends believe it, we're printing it in the newspapers. I heard this at a cocktail party. Everybody knows what everybody knows. And then it becomes like this weird truth.
Right.
Well, it was because of this, and this was becoming very obvious in January and February. Oh, the anti-vaxxers are toast. This is off the table. Bobby has overreached on this subject. Nobody wants any changes in the childhood schedule. And it was because of this sensibility that Leslie Manookian over at Health Freedom Defense Fund and I got together. And I've never done a poll before, but this poll came out for me, and I think for Leslie too. The reason we went to a poll was, first of all, I didn't know that you could just have a poll, right? I thought polls are things that other people do, like owning a yacht or having a summer home.
Well, Jeffrey, if you got the money, you can get a poll. Yeah, you could do it.
I didn't know this, and it wasn't that expensive. It was a little, more than the average person would pay, I guess. But it was a joy, because over 3 days we were able to construct the kinds of questions to which we really genuinely wanted the answers, and it was very exciting. I thought, wow! So if we ask people if force should be used to make people get a medical treatment they don't want, what will people say?
Right.
I didn't really know the answers. And so we came up with 30 questions about this stuff. And I put all sorts of questions in there, like, do you agree that the COVID response caused more damage than was really necessary to civil society? These kinds of things. We're putting everything in there. Is having a religious objection to vaccination a good basis to decline to force people to get shots? These kinds of questions, like plain questions that you just have a desire to know, what does the public mind say about this? So it was a joy for me, and we tried not to So fake polls give the person being polled the answer, like prod them. They'll say things like, "Do you think Do you think people should accept established protocols for dealing with infectious diseases? This kind of question.
Yeah, I mean, I was
So
joking with you, Jeffrey.
I,
It was like, do you support vaccines that are tried and true for generation after generation and are beautiful as the American flag
it's
and apple
so
pie?
great.
Like, what are you going to say?
I know. My favorite question from that December poll was, uh, uh, vaccines save lives. Agree or
Yes or
disagree?
no?
Oh, what? I mean, vaccines have been around since the 1790s. So if you're going to say no to this, are you actually saying that?
Well, but as you told me, 40% did say no, even still.
When I read that poll, I thought, my God, did 40% of the American public thinks vaccines have never saved a single life? I mean,
But that's indicative. And what you're saying is it's spot on. It was trying to move the people being polled, but to still see 40% of the people say no vaccine has ever saved a single life. It shows you the rage
it's
that's in the
astounding.
society. Yeah.
So we've sort of meted out these questions over several days, and then we worked with Zogby, and he came back to us, and I think it was quite late on Friday night where he delivered the results with all the crosstabs and everything, and I just was in shock. I was like on the floor. I just fell over. I thought, my God, I'm not insane. My views are consistent with what 80 to 90% of the public thinks.
Yeah.
And Leslie couldn't believe it. And the pollster himself said, look, these are very fair questions. In my whole life as a pollster, supermajorities are extremely unusual.
Yes,
I've never seen a poll like that. I've never seen a poll like. So I knew we were sitting on this sort of blockbuster account. And we only had a few days to go live with it. So then it became the issue of the presentation. I got the graphs made up and the presentations. And by the way, I declined to use AI to do any of the analysis of the poll because the AI itself was biased. It was downplaying what was very obvious, right? So I was like, oh, shut up, AI. You don't know what you're talking about.
Jeffrey, unfortunately, we're out of time here. I want to thank you. I want to thank Leslie Manookian for jumping on this so quick, for knowing that it didn't pass the smell test. You were right. You were right in spades. What you guys came out with the Zogby poll was critical at a critical moment to make sure we didn't all think we were insane, in this space. Like, wait, these things aren't making sense. And people can go to brownstone.org/poll. And the whole poll is there, brownstone.org/poll.
And I insisted
in the show notes too. We have the link here as well,
that we post the full documentation of the entire poll with the crosstabs because I didn't want anybody to doubt the authenticity. You can see the questions, the answers, and the breakdown by demographics and party, and everything that we know you can know. Right. Yes. So that's about transparency. And I'm still angry at our nice friends at the New York Times for failing to report on this.
Nice friends. You have nice friends at the New York Times, Jeffrey?
Let's just say they're after me for comments all the time. So for once I said, hey, I've got a comment for you. And did they run with it? No. So
no, they didn't. Jeffrey Tucker, Brownstone Institute. Always so great to talk to you. It's always so great to get your insights. I'm sure we're going to have you back on very, very soon. Thank you so much,
Michael. It's great to see you.
Always. Don't go anywhere because it's actually about to get even better. We have the legendary Dr. Meryl Nass interviewing Dr. Paul Marik on cancer and metabolic healing. Let's go to Meryl.
Good morning, CHD. As you just heard, today I have one of the smartest doctors and one of my favorite people to interview, who is Paul Marik. Paul was originally a physician in South Africa, came to Canada, and then we were lucky to get him in the United States. He pioneered the use of vitamin C for sepsis, reducing the mortality rate by over 50%. So he more than halved the mortality rate by simply using vitamin C appropriately for sepsis. He has been a pioneer in many areas of medicine, including the treatment of COVID. And after COVID, he left his post because, of course, he was outside the usual protocols, as I was, and he began studying cancer and metabolic diseases. And with his usual attention to detail, reading hundreds or thousands of papers in the literature. He has basically helped to overturn the incorrect paradigm under which the entire treatment of cancer is based in the United States. And I'm going to just let Dr. Paul Marik speak, and I'll interrupt him every once in a while to ask a question in case he uses a terminology or a concept that I think the audience may not be familiar with. And I also want to mention that he has a Substack. And when you have a Substack, it gives the audience, the readers, the opportunity to actually ask questions of Dr. Marik that he is likely to answer. And so you should consider subscribing to his Substack if you have cancer, if you know anyone with cancer, if you are one of the many people, probably including myself, who has metabolic disease. My hemoglobin A1C is 5.8, which is too high, but thank God, at least according to Western medicine, it is not, I'm not quite pre-diabetic yet. But he can tell you how to fix those issues, the pre-diabetes, which is rampant in society, or diabetes, as well as help you to prevent cancer, to treat cancer, and to understand the current treatments and what about them you may choose to use or choose not to use. So, Paul, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Meryl. Thanks for that very kind introduction. You're a great friend and colleague, and it's a pleasure to be here. So maybe we should start off with the crisis that we're facing, and it's an unseen crisis, and many people don't recognize it. But the risk of getting cancer is increasing exponentially. And currently, 1 in 2 people, that's like half the population, will develop a cancer during their lifetime. And that is staggering statistics and is far going to exceed the risk of cardiac disease. So if it doesn't affect you personally, it's going to affect someone in your family or somebody that you know. So people need to be aware of the consequences and the importance of this disease. So it's on the rise. Secondly, what we know is that to some degree, it's preventable. So obviously you can't change your genes, but you can change your lifestyle. And the enormous lifestyle factors and environmental factors that increase the risk. You mentioned being pre-diabetic and insulin resistance. And that condition arises because of our really bad eating habits. Most Americans are addicted to processed foods, are sugar addicts, and have insulin resistance. And insulin is a growth factor. And apart from, insulin resistance underlies many diseases, one of which is cancer. There's no question that people who are insulin resistant have an increased risk of cancer. But it's also important in other diseases, such as heart disease. There's this myth that it's cholesterol. It's not cholesterol, it's insulin resistance. And then there's diabetes, prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, and Alzheimer's disease. So insulin resistance is really important. So, one of the first steps in reducing one's risk of getting cancer is to deal with insulin resistance. And it's not difficult. What you need to do is change from eating processed food to real food. And it's quite easy to tell the difference. If it looks like food, it's food. If it comes in a box or in a wrapper and has lots of labels, then it's unlikely to be food. So we should spend most of our time eating real food. The other is that we should only eat 2 times a day. Americans on average eat 7 times a day. They spend the whole day snacking, and they snack on highly processed food and foods with seed oils. So obviously that's pretty bad. And then obviously, other risk factors include lack of exercise, poor sleep, smoking, exposure to carcinogens. So, and pesticides. Some of this is difficult to avoid, but people in rural areas or farming areas are exposed to pesticides. So, sorry, that's my stupid phone. So there are enormous things that people can do to reduce the risk. The other one, which I didn't mention, is very simple, is vitamin D. So the data shows that almost every patient who gets cancer is vitamin D deficient. They have a vitamin D level less than 20. There's overwhelming scientific data. Now, the powers that be don't want to believe this because it goes against their narrative. They would prefer that there are lots of cancer patients because they can then use all of their expensive drugs. But there's absolutely no question of doubt. It's irrefutable that if you supplement with vitamin D, and you want a reasonable dose, not the stupid dose recommended by the daily allowance. The daily allowance is like 400, which is stupid. I mean, that's fine for a mouse, not for a human. So we would say at least 5,000 units if you're a big person, up to 10,000. So there's no question of doubt that increasing your intake of vitamin D reduces your risk. So this doesn't negate the fact that going into the sunshine and walking outside and being exposed to the sun is a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. And there's really data. There are people who are petrified of the sun. I don't know why. They think they're going to get skin cancer or whatever. So they do whatever they can to cover themselves up and avoid the sun. And epidemiological data shows that if you do that, you increases your risk of dying. So we need sun, we need sunshine, and we need to walk outside. So vitamin D is important. And then there's omega-3 fatty acids. So our diet is completely lopsided. We have too much omega-6s from seed oils and processed foods, and too little omega-3s from mainly fish products. So just supplementing your diet with vitamin D and omega-3s at really quite low doses. A study in a peer-reviewed journal showed it decreased your risk of cancer by 60%. Isn't that remarkable? 60%. So, this should be a major incentive of healthcare providers and public health to reduce the risk of cancer. And they seem to be completely ignorant or unwilling to participate in really simple interventions. So I think people need to take responsibility for their own health, realize they're at risk of getting cancer, and that there are a whole bunch of things they can do, including stopping smoking, which is such a stupid habit, and drinking lots of alcohol, which is a bad habit too. So that was really the first point. The second point I was going to talk about is, what is cancer and why do you get cancer? So really, cancer is an uncontrolled proliferation of cells. Now, oncologists and the standard of care or the standard narrative is that it's due to a mutation in a single cell. So a mutation is a change in the chromosome. The sequence changes, and that gives rise to a daughter population of cells with the same mutation, which then grow and give you a mass of cells with the same mutation. That's called the somatic mutation theory of cancer. However, I think we can say, and why that's important is chemotherapy, which is the basis of many oncological treatments, is based on the somatic mutation theory. And it goes for the chromosomes, it alkylates them or changes DNA synthesis. And so that theory is almost certainly wrong, incorrect. There's overwhelming scientific data that theory just doesn't hold water. So if you're treating patients based on incorrect theory, you're treating them with the incorrect drugs, which is a tragedy. So now we don't know all the answers and the science hasn't settled. But there is overwhelming data that cancer is a metabolic disease, much like, very surprising when people hear this, much like diabetes or metabolic syndrome, is for a whole host of reasons. The metabolic pathways in the cell get altered, and this is largely due to damage to the mitochondria, which are the energy powerhouses of the cell. This was discovered in 1914 by Otto Warburg, who noted that cancer cells have an absolute hunger for glucose. They are glucose dependent. And instead of the glucose going to the mitochondrion, it's metabolized through what's called aerobic glycolysis. It generates less ATP. And this finding of glucose dependency is a universal finding in all cancer cells. So the PET scan, which is used to diagnose cancer, basically what they do is they hook up an isotope to glucose, they inject it, and then it gets taken up by the tumor. And that's how a PET scan lights up, because it's the glucose carrying the tracer. So we have overwhelming evidence that cancer is a metabolic disease, that it's highly glucose dependent. There is a little bit of controversy because some cells will use fatty acids, but not alone as a source of energy. The predominant source is glucose. So if you know the pathways that are involved in the Warburg effect and glucose aerobic metabolism, you can actually target these pathways with specific repurposed drugs and nutraceuticals, which basically starve the cell of glucose. I should add that probably step number one, the very first thing patients need to do is change their diet. Most patients have metabolic syndrome, pre-diabetes, and are taking a lot of glucose. So you need to decrease glucose intake. That's the very first thing. And so this is not just abstract. There's data, scientific data published in oncological peer-reviewed journals, so you can't argue, showing that excess intake of glucose increases your risk of metastatic spread. This is irrefutable. So the first thing is to change your diet. So not only will it make you healthier, improve your immune status, it starves the cancer. So the first step is always glucose control. And so the paradox is, and it's somewhat of a joke, patient goes to oncologist, says to oncologist, what should I eat? And the oncologist will say, almost universally, and it doesn't matter actually, eat what you want to. Eat ice cream, eat chocolates, eat cake. That makes no difference. And that's completely and utterly false. And based on the metabolic theory, it's false, but based on patient outcomes and scientific investigation, we know it's wrong. So the first step always is diet change. So we recommend a low glucose diet. Secondly, we recommend repurposed drugs and nutraceuticals that act through these metabolic pathways to starve the cell of energy. And these are repurposed drugs. They're cheap. Includes drugs such as, metformin, ivermectin, mebendazole, curcumin, green tea. So unlike chemo drugs, which can cost, a single drug can cost over $100,000. We're talking about, very economical drugs. And this is important because this is a worldwide phenomenon. The increase in cancer is worldwide. So, we become very focused on the US, but, we have a moral obligation to think of patients in, middle and lower income countries who can't afford, these fancy checkpoint inhibitors that cost over 100,000. So these are, very inexpensive drugs. And the other thing that's important is the immune system. Part of the reason patients get cancer, most of the time we develop a cancer cell. And what happens is we have a robust immune system, and our immune system kills the cancer cell. That we have T cells and natural killer cells, which destroy the cancer. So part of the management, in addition to starving the cancer and reducing the nutrients, is to actually boost the immune system. The most important is vitamin D. So vitamin D are receptors on almost all of the immune cells. And there's absolutely no question of doubt that vitamin D improves immunity and helps kill the cell. And then there are other drugs that we use that improve immunity, such as green tea and curcumin and ivermectin. So almost all the drugs or repurposed drugs we recommend act by improving the immune system. And so it's a multi-pronged approach and a multi-pronged attack. Chemotherapeutic drugs act via one pathway and one pathway alone, and it's going to fail. So one example is women who have estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. The treatment is always an estrogen receptor blocker. You try to block the receptor. But cancers are smarter than that. So what happens is the estrogen receptor becomes resistant to estrogen, and that no longer responds to the estrogen blocker. The most common is tamoxifen. So this idea of blocking one pathway, which oncologists often do with breast cancer, prostate cancer, and other cancers, it doesn't make sense, because the cancers are smart and they can bypass the pathways, use different receptors. So we've developed this protocol, which we call the metabolic trap. So rather than treating one pathway, we treat at least 5 simultaneously. So this kind of prevents the cancer cell developing, making energy, and it dies. And most of these agents act on the immune system at the same time, which is really important, because if you think about it, chemotherapy is a bit dumb, because what it does is it knocks off your bone marrow. It decreases your immunity. It decreases the cells you need to fight cancer. And so neutropenia is a part and parcel of chemotherapy. Obviously, it kills the rapidly growing cells, but it leaves the patient, with severe complications, including, immune failure. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Part of probably one of the more important developments in traditional oncology now are drugs that act on the immune system. So, I think more informed oncologists are going to be using, they don't like what we talk about because they don't make money from it. It's not a profitable business, particularly for pharmaceutical companies. And the way it actually works, which I didn't realize, is there are protocols that are written with enormous big pharma influence. And unless the oncologist follows the protocol, they don't get paid. So these are people that are automatons. They're not real doctors. They don't look after patients. They just write protocols, and that way they get paid. And not only do they get paid for ordering the chemo drugs, they actually get paid for giving them. It's one of the few instances where they actually get paid for giving a drug. So they get a double bonus. So there has been a change in the use of drugs that act on the immune system. The most common is a drug called Keytruda, which is known as a checkpoint inhibitor, which acts to improve immunity. The problem is not all patients respond. You have to have what's called a hot tumor that's going to take up these drugs and have an immune effect. The other is they can have terrible side effects, including lung damage. And the other is they're very expensive, over $100,000. And so many patients actually develop severe financial problems. The data shows, this is from oncological data, about 60% of patients develop financial difficulties because of the costs of their medication. So we've covered kind of, a whole bunch of stuff, which I think is important. I need to emphasize that, there are protocols to prevent cancer. And one of the things we've developed with one of my colleagues it's called the Root Protocol. So it's, treating insulin resistance, it's exercise, it's sleep. Exercise is very important. And then a collection of not pharmaceutical, really, repurposed drugs and nutraceuticals to reduce the risk of cancer. And so, patients who are at risk, so if you have a family history, which is really important, if you were jabbed with that jabbing thing, we know that being jabbed significantly increases your risk of cancer. It's very difficult to risk stratify because it's a complicated disease and we can't measure circulating spike, but certainly if you've been jabbed, you have an increased risk. And then obviously there are some people who have genetic predisposition to cancer, and these people need to be protected. One of there are practitioners out there, and they're very loud and have a big social presence, and they push a lot of drugs. And if you follow their agenda, you think all patients respond and they have 100% success rate, and that's obviously false. So our goal is to help patients. Many of them we can stabilize the disease. Our goal is to get rid of the cancer, but some patients don't respond. So you then need to have a backup mechanism. What do you do next? And one of the things which makes a lot of sense is called Metronomic Chemotherapy. And so people should think about this seriously. So metronomic chemotherapy is, first of all, it's chemo drugs taken orally. So, these are generic drugs, so they're inexpensive. They can be taken orally. They act synergistically. They act really well together with the metabolic approach. And they do not have the same side effects as systemic chemotherapy. And it works very well together with repurposed drugs. So when patients kind of fail the first approach, our next approach would be to add low-dose chemo. And then if that should fail, there's some actual local techniques that you can use. Intratumoral immunotherapy, intratumoral electrical pulse therapy, which kind of shatters and breaks the cancer. It releases the antigens from the cancer and then stimulates the immune system. So, we have a staggered approach to treating cancer. It's a very complicated disease. The science has not all been sorted out, as people may think. So it's an ongoing process. What I would suggest is, I've spent a lot of time reading and writing. It's all I do on this topic. And so I have a Substack, which is growing and evolving on basically cancer, but also some metabolic diseases. And we go through, the causes of cancer, the approach to cancer, and things that you can do, prevention of cancer. The other thing which I think is a travesty is that if you have surgery for cancer, we know what will happen is during the surgical procedure, cancer cells get dislodged into the bloodstream and will spread and will give rise to metastases or distant spread. And there are a number of approaches, a number of medications that will categorically and emphatically decrease your risk of getting metastatic disease. So if you're having breast surgery or colorectal surgery, I think it's medical malpractice for the surgeon or with oncologists not to prescribe these very simple, cheap, effective drugs which will reduce your risk of metastatic spread.
What are they? What are
Yes,
they, Paul?
yes, a good question. So drugs such as doxycycline, drugs such as metoprolol, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs such as Celebrex, um, or some of the drugs on this protocol. There's something called uh, modified citrus pectin, which binds the circulating cell. So there are a whole bunch of these are really cheap, inexpensive drugs. Probably modified citrus pectin would be number one. You know, propranolol, which is a non-selective beta blocker, is number two. Celebrex is number three. Some patients, particularly colorectal cancer, you give them cimetidine, which is an H2 blocker. So there are a list of drugs which prevent metastatic disease, and this has been well proven. This is not just, a hypothetical uh, concept. It's been actually proven. So, that's the other thing, in patients who are having biopsies or having surgery, they should insist. They should be part of the healthcare management team. They're not passive passengers that just follow blindly what they're told by the big fancy doctors. They should, participate. It should be informed consent. They should participate in the decision making and in the course of therapy. Unfortunately, what often happens is the patients, the cancer word scares the hell out of patients. They think they have to rush into getting treatment, and they really are not well informed, and they just believe what they're told by their oncologist. The oncologist has a vested interest, what's called making money and protecting their salary. So they will recommend those therapies that are in their own best interests. So
Right.
patients,
Well, there's another thing. They don't want to lose their jobs the way we did because they went against the the current thing, whatever it is, whatever everybody else is doing. As long as you do what everyone else is doing, even if it kills the patients, you're safe. But as soon as you step aside and try to do something different or better, if someone is harmed, you can be sued for malpractice, right? And lose. But as long as you're doing what everyone else is doing, the standard of care, you're protected. You're not going to lose a malpractice suit. So that, there are so many different things pushing doctors to do the wrong thing. I have another question for you. Thomas Seyfried, who agrees with you on almost everything, suggests that glutamine also feeds cancers, and cancer patients should be taking an anti-glutamine drug. And glutamine, of course, is an amino acid that's in all our food. What is your feeling about glutamine?
yeah, so Thomas Seyfried, I mean, he's a very smart man. He probably is a world expert on the metabolism of cancer cells. And I agree with him. Cancer cells are dependent on glucose and glutamine, maybe to a lesser extent fatty acids. So you need to decrease glucose and glutamine. Now, glutamine is an amino acid. It's in the protein you eat. So it's almost impossible to be on a glutamine-free diet. But there are many drugs that actually block the glutaminolysis pathway. As simple things as mebendazole and green tea, for example. So, most of the drugs, many of the repurposed drugs we recommend are really multifunctional and will block glutamine. Dr. Seyfried uses a drug called DOM. The problem is it's not a commercially available drug. So in his experimental models, blocking glutamine with DOM works really well in, accelerating cancer cell death, but it's not a commercially available drug. So that's why things like mebendazole and green tea and a whole bunch of others, as a secondary effect, block glutamine. So yeah, you and him are correct.
What to sort of come to the end of this segment, are there any other important things that you want to tell the audience?
So the first thing is, I think they need to be informed. I think the days of uninformed patients is over. Patients need to be part of the team. They need to understand what's happening and they need to participate in the decision-making process. It's absolutely critical. They need to understand and they should not follow blindly what they're told by their doctor. They have a choice. They have many choices. And so informed consent and educating patients is so critical. And I think patients have an obligation, to become informed. And that way they can guide the treatment that they get. So I think that's the most important. And, informed consent is really important. Patients must understand what they're getting into. And obviously, as we spoke about, it's largely a preventable disease. And it's something that people should think about, particularly, kids that, are obese. The obesity epidemic extends into childhood. Most kids don't eat food. They just simply don't eat food. They eat processed, chemicalized, manufactured substances that are not food. And that's really a tragedy that has to change. Fortunately, Bobby Kennedy is making an effort to change the food pyramid. And, there's certain things such as fruit juices and sodas have been directly linked to cancer because of the high glucose and fructose load. So these are important things. And obviously, parents should have a responsibility to, first of all, be role models, but also to teach the kids how to eat healthily and be healthy. Because what they do is they don't exercise, they sit with their stupid devices and they eat processed foods. I mean, is there a more unhealthy diet or lifestyle that you can think of? So, in my humble opinion, these devices should be banned from young kids. They spend too much time on devices which are of no value and they just sit and eat processed food. So, parents really have an obligation to change their lifestyle.
Yeah, let me point out that one can or bottle of Coca-Cola, for instance, because it has acid in it, you don't taste how sweet it is, but it has about 10 teaspoons of sugar. That's almost 200 calories of sugar and no nutrition at all. And that Americans are eating on average 1 to 2 pounds of sugar, pure sugar, a week, and may not realize it. So people have never had access to so much sugar, and many have become addicted to it. If you stop eating it for about 2 weeks, your addiction is generally going to go away, and it won't be as exciting to you. In other words, if you haven't eaten any sugar for 2 weeks and someone offers you a carrot, an apple, or a cookie or a piece of cake, you actually may prefer the carrot or the apple to these sweet products. The other thing is that we used to bake cakes and cookies using flour, and in the old days it was ground relatively recently, but now for processed food, everything is broken down to its most basic constituents, and again, all the nutrients are taken away, so that when you're getting these ultra processed foods from a store that are packaged, they have things to change the flavor, change the texture, etc., but not include nutrition. And you're paying about 38 cents on the dollar for this junk food. So it's relatively cheaper than if you were buying meat or cheese or more healthy eggs, things like that. So you can save money by eating junk food, but you pay in the end because your health will be so poor as you age. I'm 75 years old. I look reasonably good. It's
Oh,
because
you
I've
look
eaten
like in
very.
your 20s. You look in your 20s still.
Oh, come on. So, I'm relatively vigorous, and it's because I have not been eating processed food during my life. I'm a vegetarian. I cook vegetables every day. I eat cheese and dairy products, um, and you can see the difference. So
Just
I
in,
would advise you.
yeah, just to interrupt, one of the biggest scams is this low-fat stories. So there was the scare that saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease, which is false. So you go to the store and everything is low fat. Well, actually, what you want is high fat, because if it's low in fat, it's going to be high in sugar and carbohydrates. So,
Okay, well, you want the right fats. So you want dairy fats, and you want them these days. Most of the bovine growth hormone is out of the dairy products, but bovine growth hormone was used to stimulate the production of milk, and it was a cancer promoter. So you don't want bovine growth hormone. Ideally, you want organic milk. You want organic fats because the carcinogens are fat soluble and they will preferentially be in the fats that you eat. So you don't want corn oil, you don't want soy oil, you don't want Crisco or Wesson oil. You want ideally olive oil, but many of the olive oils have been adulterated with other oils. Coconut oil is generally organic, but you don't want it to have been extracted using solvents. So you have to be careful about what coconut oil you buy. And butter, organic butter, or
but it's
ghee
good. So people,
are very good fats.
yeah.
Or flax oil. Don't cook the flax oil. Use it raw as a salad dressing. I add it to yogurt in the morning. And that way you're getting a good dose. I add a good dose of omega-3s. And it has a nutty flavor. It tastes good. If it tastes like fish, or tastes bad, it's gone off. It has become oxidized and you should not eat it. You keep flax oil in a cold, dark place in the refrigerator. You keep your good oils in the refrigerator, not out.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. And it emphasizes how diet and lifestyle is such a central factor in cancer, but also in heart disease and diabetes and Alzheimer's. And we certainly, if we followed your diet, we would look young and frisky like you, and we would be healthy. It's really our lifestyle that generates chronic disease. And so Big Pharma makes money on chronic disease because these people are drugged forever. They don't like diseases where you give medication and that they're cured because they then lose customers. They want customers for life who take meds for life.
So go to Dr. Marik's Substack, take a look, subscribe if you're interested. He has lots of really good information there. And I thank you for coming on, and I hope you'll come back again soon.
Thank you, Meryl.
We're live.
Okay. This is Maddie Rose Johnston. Say hi.
Hi, Maddie.
Or
Rose.
smile. Give you a big smile right there to the camera. You like being on camera. Yeah.
Okay, so what's your name?
I'm Susan Johnston.
And you are Mom.
I'm Mom.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell us what happened. Tell us her story.
Well, of course, she's adopted. And when she was born, her mom kind of forced her to be born at that time with cocaine. And so she was born without a heartbeat or anything like that. They resuscitated her. Probably took about 25 minutes for them to give her a 4 APGAR score. So she did have a level 1 brain bleed, done by scans and everything like that. But we know with medical records that still within a couple of hours of being resuscitated, they gave her all the appropriate vaccines that they do. So fast forward a couple months in the hospital, and she had cleared her brain bleed. So they had scans that showed that her brain bleed was gone.
And was she in your care at this point?
No, not yet, not yet. They did put a G-tube in because basically birth mom stayed there to help take care of her, and it just wasn't going well, and so they just put in a feeding tube. 3.5 months we got her, brought her home, and we got her to eat by bottle. We got her at least 80 cc's of feeding, and then would finish in the G-tube.
But no diagnosis of cerebral palsy.
Well, they said, she might, just because of the level 1 brain bleed. But I know cerebral palsy has multiple, degrees to it. And so she would keep her head up. We have pictures of her sucking on her hands. We have grasping toys. She almost rolled over at about 6 months. And then the day, August 20th, 2015, and because she's foster care, they forced us to go ahead and give her vaccines.
At 2 months.
This is now we're up to, we're 6.5 months, with 3 months being in our care.
She had not had vaccines before?
No, she had all these. Oh, they gave her everything they could in the hospital. And so I don't really remember anything that night, but we could not wake her in the morning. After the DTaP. So
that's the only one she had that day?
Yes, because I knew by this time to delay them. And I would fight with the pediatrician, and so it was just the DTaP that day. And could not rouse her. When we could rouse her, it didn't seem like she could hear. We were, doing all sorts of things to see if, loud noises shocked her, nothing. And then she would just kind of, don't want to say comatose, but just would not wake up, and when she did wake up, she was very lethargic. And I guess just through some friends of mine, I found a homeopathic doctor that treated her that night. We did the Epsom salts bath, and we did the, I don't know what else she gave her. It's such a blur. But at that point, she stopped putting her hands midline, stopped eating, stopped trying to roll over. She did seem to get like her hearing back and everything. We went to the pediatricians on Monday, not because of the weekend. Told to our face she was vaccine injured, but if you go back and look in the medical records, it says mom comes in complaining of a vaccine injury, and that's all it says. But because she had had a brain scan before she was sent home, I convinced the same neurologist to do another one, and you could see clearly that her brain scans went down. Is it the amplitude of it or something like that? But she was here, and it went down, and basically the neurologist cried. He was so sad that because he had seen the progress that she had been making, and just we've continued to try and detox things out of her, because she was still foster care. We did have to get a few more vaccines along the way, which I went straight to detoxing right afterwards, and when we adopted her at 3, we totally stopped all vaccinations. And she does roll over now. In fact, she rolls all across the floor if she wants to, but that didn't happen until she was about 3 years old, close to 3 years old, so all that delayed. She still really won't put her hands midline. She might grab her hair, but you can see her hands stay far out. So, and they just treat it as cerebral palsy from birth, but I know what it was. We know what it was.
You think the DTaP just was the bullet
Yes.
to the head, if you like, the
Yeah.
last thing that finished it?
Yes. So, not that we knew. I mean, it could have been the very first one they gave her in the hospital. That could have done it. That could have done partially. Could just, progressively gotten worse along the way, and the DTaP just finish that off.
So what's a day in the life like for her?
Today's a really bad day to ask that. It's been a hard day. She is a relatively happy kid. She has a great smile. Will you show your smile? Her brother calls it her spiritual gift. Because, I mean, when she smiles at you, everybody just lights up. Her friends at church try and get her to smile on purpose, and it's like, yay, she smiled for us. You on there? So she's typically happy. She loves watching TV. She loves watching people. She's a people watcher. But, you know, I'm older. She's getting heavier. It can get hard. But we've pretty much, to keep her healthy, we keep her out of the hospital. And so we try to, go all natural that we can now. It's been an education for me, and just, you know, juggling a cold. She did get flu B and pneumonia at Christmas time. And if you can imagine, I got it also, but for her, it's like a 3-week process, just trying to keep her fevers down so she doesn't have seizures, she has a hard time coughing. So it's, you know, really hard that way. She can't blow her nose, and so you're just managing. It can be exhausting.
Do you have help?
My husband. So.
Is there anything else you want to tell everybody?
Well, we appreciate what you do. So it's, you know, nice to know that people are there to just encourage you. That's all. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you looking after her.
Yeah. She's a blessing.
She's beautiful.
Yeah. Wait until she smiles. One smile. We get one smile.
Oh,
No.
one smile.
One smile, Maddie Rose. Nope.
There's a lot going on in this bar.
Yeah. So, she understands everything.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you saw the communication device.
Yeah.
That.
She was, for people listening, she was communicating with us with her communication device.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
But yes, it's tragic, is it not, what they've done to these children?
Yeah.
But at least we have her.
Yeah.
I want these babies here.
She is a blessing.
Thank you for coming and telling your story.
Thank you
Sitting
for
on the bus.
letting us.
You can sign the bus.
All right. I'm going to sign the bus?
46% of the American people say mandates are dangerous, they're damaging, and vaccine science isn't settled.
A steady decline of childhood vaccine rates. Vaccination rates continued to decline last year.
There's a discourse about vaccines that didn't exist before.
Children's Health Defense.
Children's Health Defense.
Children's Health Defense.
Children's Health Defense.
Children's Health Defense is the leader in the health freedom movement.
The Department of Health and Human Services is overhauling the immunization schedule.
Now only recommending 11.
We are making recommendations that are science-based, that are common sense.
Secretary Hegseth, discarding the mandatory flu vaccine requirement.
Your body, your faith, and your convictions are not negotiable.
People recognize you have to be able to make an individualized decision.
For the first time, the U.S. FDA will acknowledge that COVID-19 vaccines killed American children.
States are putting in place medical freedom laws. There's bills in Congress that Children's Health Defense is supporting, the GRACE Act for the right to religious exemptions, the End the Vaccine Carve-Out, ending liability protection, and Tom Massey's bill to repeal the PrEP Act.
One of the most aggressive medical accountability lawsuits in decades.
Suing the American Academy of Pediatrics.
CHD is suing under RICO laws, claiming that the AAP operates as a criminal enterprise and has for decades.
A federal judge yesterday blocked Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s recent overhaul of the nation's childhood vaccine schedule.
They basically just froze all vaccine policy.
The American Academy of Pediatrics and other medical groups filed a lawsuit arguing the vaccine changes violated federal law.
Which is outrageous for a single judge sitting in Boston to stop any work at the Centers for Disease Control related to vaccines.
This conflict between medical freedom and medical coercion, it's a fundamental conflict that we must resolve now in favor of medical freedom or forever be truly slaves to medical tyranny.
I am so glad that there are people like you who are still fighting this.
Children's Health Defense. If you don't know what they do, folks, look it up.
We have got to, as a society, global, decide, is medical coercion okay, or do you have a right to decide what happens to your body?
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.